Hello everyone and welcome to yet another Genshin Impact lore video. Today, I'm going to dive into the lore of the Crimson Witch of Flame, better known as the 8th Fatui Harbinger, La Signora. Her lore comes from many different places, with the Crimson Witch of Flame's artifacts giving us most of the information on her past. With that said though, it's time to dive right into the lore of La Signora. Over 500 years ago, La Signora lived in Mondstadt, and went by the name of Rosalyne-Kruzchka Lohefalter. Rosalyne was a lovely young maiden, who eventually fell in mutual love with a knight named Rostam. While he usually had a serious personality, Rosalyne was able to make him laugh and smile. Rostam also trained a certain white knight, who eventually became the Bloodstained Knight, who I also made a video on earlier this week. Anyways, Rostam would eventually give her a special Hydro timepiece, which would keep track of how long she was away at the Academia in Sumeru, and how long it was until she would return. Rosalyne of course went to study at the Sumeru Academia, where she was presumably a scholar of pyromagic, considering her future abilities. It is possible that this is where she learned of the art of liquid fire, which she would use to become the Crimson Witch later on. This art, however, has now been lost to time. Speaking of the Crimson Witch though, it wouldn't be long before the Cataclysm struck Teyvat. Upon return to her hometown in Mondstadt, Rosalyne found it in ruins, destroyed by monsters. Worst of all, she would find her lover, Rostam, dead amidst the rubble, having been slain in the battle that took place. Overcome with grief and rage, Rosalyne used her life's flame on a mission to cleanse the world's crookedness. It is rumored that she abandoned her mortal body, allowing fire itself to flow through her veins, through the lost art of liquid fire. With this, she would now become the Crimson Witch of Flame. Her intense flame left her body scarred and burned, but she wore a witch's hat so she would not see the damage she had done to herself. This also allowed her to focus, which is why her skills were so great, even as an apprentice. However, she was also unaware of just how much damage she was causing. While she only burned monsters, the people became fearful of her, much like Viridescent in the Bloodstained Knight. Eventually, her power became so great that it started to consume her own body. Slowly, it would creep towards her own heart, threatening to burn it away, which would end the life of the Crimson Witch if it did so. However, before the flame could extinguish her life, she was found by Piero, the first of the Fatui. Seeing her as a valuable asset, he offered her a cryo-delusion to suppress the flame and save her life. He also offered her a place among the Fatui, to which she accepted. With this, she would become La Signora, the Fair Lady. With the help of this delusion, the flame would be suppressed, but would still silently linger. The delusion would also help her willingly cast aside and forget about her own past, including her own name and even Rostam. With her days as the Crimson Witch behind her, she would grow more powerful, becoming the 8th of the 11 Fatui Harbingers. Over the next few hundred years, Signora would continue her life as a Fatui Harbinger, becoming far more brutal than she was as Rosalyne or even the Crimson Witch. As the Crimson Witch, she would never harm people, but as La Signora, she would harm her subordinates if they stepped out of line. Eventually, Signora would arrive in Mondstadt as part of the Tsarits's plan to obtain all 7 Gnoses. Her subordinates would be placed in various parts of the city, including Victor in the Favonius Cathedral. These Fatui members would also stay in the Goth Grand Hotel, which was rented out indefinitely by fellow Harbinger Pantalone. After restoring Dvalin and returning the Holy Lyre der Hamel, Venti and the Traveler would be ambushed by Signora outside of the Favonius Cathedral. Here, she would easily overpower Venti with her cryo powers, mocking him and his status as a god as she did. When Venti snaps back at her, she responds by taking his Gnosis by force. She then knocks Venti unconscious with a swift kick, with her subordinates knocking the traveler out as well. She would then quickly leave Mondstadt, leaving nothing for the Knights of Favonius to find as evidence that she was there. This experience gave the traveler a bad impression of the Fatui, especially Signora. Later on, in Liyue, all the events that occurred leading up to and including the revival and subsequent defeat of Osile were revealed to be orchestrated by Zhongli himself as part of a plan to see if Liyue was ready to rule themselves. It was also revealed that Zhongli had a contract regarding his gnosis with the Cryo-Archon, the Tsaritsa. The liaison between the two, and the one assigned to retrieve the gnosis following Zhongli's plan, was none other than Signora. After seeing his plan was a success, Zhongli willingly exchanged his gnosis to Signora. As for what he exchanged for it, he doesn't tell us, stating it is solely a matter between the Tsaritsa and himself. After successfully retrieving both the Anemo-Gnosis and the Geognosis for the Tsaritsa, Signora would go for a third, the Electro-Gnosis in Inazuma. Knowing the traveler could be a threat, she plotted with the head of the Kanjo Commission, Hiragi Shunsuke, to keep the traveler stuck in Rito when they arrived in Inazuma. Signora was also in Inazuma to further the Delusion Factory's productions. These delusions were also supplied to the Watatsumi army, and were used to fuel the civil war in Inazuma. Eventually, though, she would hand this job over to Scaramouche, and would then head to Tenshukaku to seek an audience with the Shogun and attempt to obtain her gnosis. Upon learning of this, the traveler would immediately head over to Tenshukaku to confront Signora, despite currently being a wanted criminal in Inazuma. In their anger for Signora's previous actions, they challenged her to a duel before the throne, to which the Shogun agrees to let happen. In the battle, the traveler overpowers her while she is using her cryo-delusion, forcing her to release herself from the shackles of her delusion and unleash her true power. The Crimson Witch would return, but she would now be the Crimson Witch of Embers, rather than the Crimson Witch of Flame, showing how this is not how strong she was 500 years ago. Upon becoming the Crimson Witch once again, her old memories would return. She would remember her name, Rosalyne-Kruzchka Lohefalter, and also her pain and suffering from 500 years ago. Most of all, she would remember the face of the person who she could never see again, her love, Rostam. Still though, Signora would once again be overpowered by the traveler, reverting back from her Crimson Witch form. In accordance with the rules of the duel, the Shogun would step down with their sword drawn. Signora tried to talk her way out of it, with legitimate fear in her voice, but she is nevertheless killed by the Raiden Shogun's Musono Hitotachi. Despite what she's done to the traveler and the people they know, they were rather shaken by her death, especially as she instantly dissolved into ashes upon being hit by the Shogun's killing strike. Perhaps the pale flame resting inside her finally won at this moment as well, burning away her body. In the end though, this battle and death was in vain. The Shogun didn't even have the Gnosis, which means that Signora didn't have to be in Tenshukaku attempting to steal it. However, she could not have known where it truly was, and the traveler didn't find out until after as well. In truth, Yai Miko possessed the Electro-Gnosis, and had traded it to Scaramouche in the Delusion Factory in exchange for the traveler's life. Scaramouche then abandoned the Fatui, having finally obtained the heart he desired. Of course, he went on to work with the Torii and Sumeru later on, but for now, he was on his own. Anyways, Signora's death shook the Fatui as a whole. Some of her subordinates remained in Inazuma to cause chaos and exact revenge against the Raiden Shogun and Inazuma, while her other subordinates were recalled to Snezhnaya to be assigned to other harbingers. There would also be Fatui soldiers under other harbingers working to increase their harbingers' prestiges, due to the vacancy left by Signora's death. Efim Snezovich worked to increase Arlecchino's prestige in Inazuma by sabotaging peace talks between the Shogunate and Watatsumi armies. This does not necessarily mean increasing their rank, but more likely increasing the value of their reputations. And of course, a funeral was held by the Harbingers in honor of Signora, with work temporarily halting so that the nation could mourn the passing of their 8th Harbinger. She was then entombed in a building covered in multiple layers of ice, where she would reside in eternal slumber. When we first met Signora, I wasn't expecting her to have such a tragic backstory and such a tragic death. Despite how little we got to see of her, she was such an interesting character, and I hope we get more lore bits about her in the future sometime. I'd love to hear your thoughts about her in the comments below as well. And be sure to leave ideas on what you guys want me to cover in these videos as well. I want to know what you guys want to see. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.